and there are hardly a handful of countries, even if those who are speaking up on Kashmir. So I think it would be correct. The issue is largely now, to a great extent, dependent on how the Kashmiris are going to fight it out and the nature of the resistance there. The topic for this afternoon is scrapping of Article 370. Article 370, as you know, was a part of the Indian Constitution that gave to Kashmir a special status. Part of that was allowing the Kashmiris, giving them the right to have their own assemblies, and within those assemblies, one of the key rights they had was to determine the nature of citizenship in Jammu and Kashmir. So who could be a citizen, who could buy property, who could be living there. So what we saw in 2019, the scrapping of this clause in the Constitution, Article 375, by the 370, by the Modi government. It was no surprise, it should not have been a surprise, because the BJP was saying repeatedly that this is going to be the objective. They managed to not only scrap it, they also were able, or perhaps the Indian Supreme Court was able to then give a judgment in December 2023, which is less than 6 months ago, in which it was a unanimous decision saying that the scrapping was legitimate, and nobody could question the fact that the special status of the Kashmiris had ended. Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir was divided into two territories. One was Ladakh, and the other was Jammu and Kashmir, and both these were going to be ruled directly by the Union. We have two other developments as we speak. One is that since the scrapping of Article 370, you have elections being held for the first time in the areas which constituted Jammu and Kashmir. The first phase has taken place in Udhampur on the 19th of April, and it's going to be in 5 phases. And by mid-May, end of May, the election in all the territories will have taken place. So this is the second thing. The first is that the Supreme Court has justified and legitimized and said that this was the right thing to have done, and that nobody could question it any longer. And finally, of course, the big question of what are the policies that countries, and specifically Pakistan, has on the question of Jammu and Kashmir. As you well know, that we have been hearing the finance minister, the former finance minister, and now the foreign minister talking about starting trade with India. So the question I think that will be raised, and an important one, is what is Pakistan's Kashmir policy going to be? So we will come back to these questions subsequently during the discussion as well, and in the winding up. But I would like to introduce, but especially would like to introduce the two guests, the two panelists we have on going to be speaking on this subject. We have Victoria Schofield, who is a well-known and great scholar on Kashmir. It's something that Ms. Schofield has worked on and has written books on the subject and follows it very diligently, very closely, and may I say it's close to her mind and heart both. Is that correct? So, but her scholarship is really one that is work of great reference and great value, and anybody studying the subject cannot but read the works that Ms. Schofield has produced. And we have with us Mr. Tariq Naqash, who is a Kashmiri and covers for the Dawn and I'm sure other publications the issues of Jammu and Kashmir and broadly the questions of policy, etc. And I was just telling Mr. Naqash that I just read his last report, I think less than a week ago in the Dawn, in which he mentions how the Kashmiris on this side of the LOC in AJK are very restive and very concerned about what's happening on the other side in Indian occupied Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir. Without much ado now, I'd like to go to first Mr. Naqash as a Kashmiri to tell us how he sees the situation on the ground on both sides with reference to Article 370. Remember that India is strategically a very important country and getting more and more important as far as the West is concerned. And we have seen Gaza and we see how what matters and what doesn't matter in the callous world of interstate relations. So the challenge is huge for those who believe that the Kashmiris deserve their right to self-determination. So over to you, Mr. Naqash. Thank you.
नहमदु व नसल्ली अला रसूलिल करीम अम्मा बाद फ़ौज़ बिल्लाहि मिनश शैतानिर रजीम बिस्मिल्लाहिर रहमानिर रहीम. Worthy moderator and my fellow panelists, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. First of all, I would like to tell you that I am speaking to you as direct victim of Kashmir conflict. I have told earlier in an earlier conference here that I come from a divided family. My father was born in Srinagar, I was born in Muzaffarabad, and my grandfather lays buried in Srinagar, and my father lays buried in Muzaffarabad. So we have not been able to, he was not able to see his parents after he migrated to this part of Kashmir. Anyway, let's come to the point. After the lapse of just 100 more days, we'll be marking another Yom-e Istisal, or Day of Exploitation, on the occasion of the 5th anniversary of the Government of India's arbitrary and illogical, unreasonable and unconstitutional decision, whereby the state of Jammu and Kashmir that had existed in this form for at least 175 years was stripped of its special status under the Indian Constitution, and it was bifurcated into two union territories. The outrageous move was shocking for everyone on both sides of the line of control and elsewhere in the world, but it had also upset those Muslim Kashmiri politicians who are said to have a soft corner for India and who are dubbed as pro-India by others. Because they too had to face embarrassment, house arrests and other coercive measures for expressing apprehensions about this decision. But the treatment meted out to the freedom-seeking anti-India Kashmiris was the worst. And it cannot be encompassed in a small sitting where we are sitting today. The repression they faced after and on the eve of August 5, 2019 move, I believe is unparalleled in the post 1947 history of Jammu and Kashmir. Let's be clear, what is happening in India occupied Jammu and Kashmir transcends mere human rights violation. It constitutes crimes against humanity. Imagine a place where rape is being used as a weapon of war, molestation of women is used as a weapon of war with impunity. Imagine a place where humans are tied to the bonnets of military vehicles to be used as shields, and the perpetrators of these heinous crimes get scot-free. In fact, human rights violation is too small a word to describe the scale of atrocities being endured by the people of Jammu and Kashmir behind an iron curtain. You will be surprised to know that I have visited Jammu and Kashmir twice on through international border and once through the Trans-LOC bus service. And I have a lot of friends there in the journalist community. And we used to exchange information prior to this move. And you'll be surprised to know that they do not exchange pleasantries with me. because of fear of persecution by the Indian authorities. Any journalist having any connection on this side of the LOC is summoned at the police station and treated under draconian laws. Since August 5, 2019, the Indian government has imposed many draconian laws, curbs and restrictions on traditional and social media, due to which the most of Indian government's abhorrent acts are not reaching the outside world. Nevertheless, according to data compiled by a Kashmir-based organization, India has killed as many as 859 Kashmiris, 17 of them women, over the last 5 years. And this rendered 67 women widow and 184 children orphans. And the rest are more than 20,000. And the detainees include APIC leaders, journalists, rights activists, and students. Ladies and gentlemen, many of you would be thinking that August 5, 2019 moved just divested Jammu and Kashmir of statehood. No, in effect, the loss was far bigger than that, and it started unfolding in the days and months that followed it. Amid virtual strangulation of Kashmiri rights activists, political activists, social activists, New Delhi has been ceaselessly carrying out one after the other step to rob the Kashmiris of their land, identity, and livelihood opportunities. This is exactly what Israel has done and is doing to the Palestinians. Before going any further, it is important that I briefly enumerate a few steps according to their severity, their horrifying impact on the disputed region and its inhabitants. According to reports compiled by till late last year, of some 334 local laws, India repealed 164 and 167 were adapted according to the Indian constitution. And 800 new laws were introduced to strengthen India's occupation of the territory. The major one, the major blow under the new sets of laws came in early 2020 when the world was grappling with global pandemic, COVID. It was the grant of domicile rights to the Indian citizens. You all know that the property and citizenship in Kashmir is restricted to the Kashmiris under a law which was introduced not by the administration after 47. It was introduced by the Hindu ruler of the state, Maharaja Hari Singh, in 1927 on the request of the Dogras which came from his clan of Jammu and Kashmiri Pandit community. So this 35A, now the Indian government was thinking that this is a hurdle in their plans to grab to change the demography of the state. Under the new law, those who had lived in Jammu and Kashmir for 15 years were eligible to get domicile certificate. Those who had studied there for 7 years, had done their metric and intermediate exam from there, were eligible. And those Indian government officials who had served in Kashmir for 10 years, their children were also made eligible even if they had not lived there for state. Then came the land grabs. In October the same year, India allowed any of its citizens to buy land in occupied Kashmir, also in a move to dilute the Muslim majority character of the region. Furthermore, the new laws allowed government acquired land to be utilized by any official institution for industrial commercial purposes or disposed of to any Indian citizen. Additionally, the Indian Army was allowed to designate any area as strategic for military purposes and acquire it. And all of you know that recently the UP government has acquired a piece of land in the heart of Kashmir to build Maharashtra Bhavan. This is the first step towards that goal. Delimitation Commission. It was, as it was not enough, in May 2022, a three-member delimitation commission constituted by the government of India made its controversial report public, whereby the assembly constituencies in Jammu, which is the stronghold of BJP, were increased from 37 to 43. In 6 new seats were given to Jammu, while the number of seats in Kashmir Valley went up only one notch, that is from 46 to 47. This was despite the fact that the population of Jammu is 1.5 million less than the population of Kashmir Valley. Jammu's population is 5.3 million and Kashmir Valley's population is 6.8 million according to 2011 census. Then in December last year, just 5 days before the validation of the controversial decision by the India Supreme Court, Indian lower house of Parliament approved two laws whereby five reserved seats were given to the Jammu Kashmir Assembly. In addition to those 90 seats, these 5 seats, two of these seats were Kashmiri migrants. The word was used migrants, but in fact it was for Kashmiri Pandits. And one was for the person displaced from Azad Jammu and Kashmir, those who had migrated to the Indian held side in 1947, and two for women. These 5 seats meant that they tilt the balance of votes towards the party ruling India. This was meant. So, voting rights. Before the abrogation of Article 370, the voting rights were vested only in permanent residents who are otherwise known as state subjects. But as delimitation was not enough, in August 2022, India announced to allow voting rights to any Indian citizen living temporarily in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. This move is aimed at adding 2.5 million more votes, mainly the Indians temporarily residing in the region, the army personnel, government and private sector employees, migrant workers, on top of 7.6 million existing voters. These are a few major draconian steps. If I start listing other measures under India's settler colonial agenda, I would end up consuming the entire time of this session. But nevertheless, I would like to list just briefly. There are attacks on Kashmiris' religious and cultural identities. You all know the Fairan was attacked. Wazwan, our traditional Kashmiri cuisine, was attacked by by the maker of this India Files. And then there was denial of travel to Kashmiris. You know, many Kashmiri journalists have been denied. Even they are offloaded at the airports. Passport is not given to them. Denial of livelihood and employment opportunities. The license of mines is now given to all Indian companies. Earlier, the Kashmiris would get those licenses. Then replacement of Urdu. Urdu is still official language in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. It has been replaced by Hindi, and the change of the historical name of Kashmiri places. Ladies and gentlemen, may I also remind you, while the media in Kashmir, the local state-based media, was struggling hard for its survival, the Indian government came up with a new media policy in June 2020 to take full control of local media, whereby government officers have now authority to decide what is a fake news and what news has to be published. Practically, the Kashmir-based media, I also used to work for Greater Kashmir, which is the largest daily of Kashmir Valley. And believe you me, I would cover anti-India demonstrations in that paper. But now, all those papers have literally become Indian propaganda mouthpieces. They can only publish the press releases or the news items about weather or tourism, etc., etc. Since August 5, 2019, as many as 12 government employees have also been sacked by the Indian government on the charges of being sympathetic to freedom movement and threat to the India's security, without explaining them what were the basis of their dismissal, and without giving them any fair chance of representation. There were hopes that India's Supreme Court would undo the arbitrary move, and resultantly all the steps taken in pursuit of it would stand nullified. But alas, all those hopes were dashed when the 5-member bench endorsed the move in a prejudiced decision delivered on December 11 last year. The bench held that the region's special status had been a temporary arrangement and that its removal in 2019 was constitutionally permissible. Surprisingly, the same India's Supreme Court holds in April 2018 that Article 370 of the Constitution has acquired permanent status through years of existence, making its abrogation impossible. The same Supreme Court had held a year before the abrogation. Now, all said and done, the big question still remains there, that what is the way forward for the Kashmiris and for the government of Pakistan? Because I honestly believe that freedom of Kashmir is more to the benefit, will go more to the benefit of Pakistan than the Kashmiris themselves, because Kashmir is the source of the rivers that render your lands fertile, and many other things. One way forward is, in my view, is to ensure that Kashmir is not erased from public memory just because India is saying that the situation in the occupied territory has been normalized. The so-called normalcy in Kashmir is nothing but brutal silencing of the Kashmiris. Kashmiris have the right to self-determination as long as the UN resolutions hold that. And that process should not be sidelined. But this needs an extraordinary effort on the part of the government and institutions of Pakistan. We need to repeatedly emphasize the Committee of Nations, before the Committee of Nations, that abrogation of Article 370 is negation of all international and bilateral agreements and commitments by the government of India on Kashmir dispute. It is a negation of the UN Charter and the UN resolutions on Kashmir, which would have been a matter of grave concern for all members of the world body. We can also agitate a point that the instrument of accession, which the Maharaja of Kashmir had allegedly signed on in October 1947, and deciding to join India as one between the two sovereign states, has the character of an international treaty. And by revoking Article 370, the Indian government can be interpreted as returning Kashmir to the pre-agreement status as a sovereign state. As far as Azad Jammu and Kashmir or AJK is concerned, I don't think with present legal status it can play any substantial role for Kashmir issue at the international level, except trumpeting empty rhetoric for local consumption. At a time when Modi government has committed political and constitutional terrorism, aggressed, occupied and imprisoned the Kashmiri people in the disputed region, the AJK leadership has a higher burden of responsibility. First and the foremost step would be to rehabilitate the AJK government in a just and equitable manner so that it could effectively discharge its responsibilities assumed under the UNCIP resolutions. The AJK leadership desperately needs to look beyond its avidity for power in Muzaffarabad, rise above their petty political interests, and put their heads together to reach a unanimous course of action to prove their commitment to the cause. I wish, sorry, I wish Raja Farooq Haider, our former Prime Minister, would have been here today. He was earlier supposed to be key speaker today, and we could have asked him that what made him flee the country at a time when India abrogated the special status, at a time when people expected that there would be massive demonstrations in Muzaffarabad, but the leadership of this side of Kashmir went into hiding. So could have asked them. That's why I say that this leadership desperately needs to look beyond its petty political interests and their lust for power in Muzaffarabad to prove their commitment for the cause. More than 6 decades ago, excuse me, more than 6 decades ago, a selfless Kashmiri leader who used to live in this town where I am speaking to you had come up with the ideology of recognition of AJK government as the successor revolutionary government of the deposed Maharaja of the erstwhile princely state of Jammu and Kashmir, so that this government could take the charge of freedom movement and could represent the Kashmiris in the outside world itself. But alas, he had to take flak for his ideology by his opponents as well as by the mighty establishment in Pakistan. Today, 60 years down the line, I find many takers of his ideology on our side of Kashmir as well as across the LOC. And I have heard leaders appreciate and advocate the ideology as the only solution as the only way to the solution of Kashmir issue, though they do not take the name of that leader. That's why, therefore, a serious discourse without any prior prejudices is a must to put the AJK government in the driving seat so that Pakistan's advocacy, so Pakistan's advocacy in Kashmir becomes genuine and convincing. We have enough of condemnations of India's dreadful moves. We must take concrete steps To address the situation, adhering to the UN framework on Kashmir is paramount because it provides you a roadmap for solution of this issue, and it also defines who can be called the Kashmiris. Since the inception of Kashmir conflict, numerous agreements and negotiations have been attempted by both India and Pakistan, often on the with the intervention. जी नहीं 2 मिनट आखिरी बस 2 मिनट लूंगा मैं आपसे सिर्फ 2 मिनट का मतलब 2 मिनट होगा मैं ये कह रहा हूं कि इंसेप्शन से वी हैव हेल्ड न्यूमरस negotiations or agreements on the with the intervention of the third parties, mainly the UN. Magar peace remains elusive, and but still the UN framework on Kashmir serves as a primary guideline for addressing the situation. Therefore, the government and institutions of Pakistan must prioritize this framework in all of their actions and engagements. We must engage the civil societies in Western world to amplify the voices of Kashmiris and garner maximum support for their cause. And this also needs strategic planning and coordination. Any half-hearted or disjointed effort will only serve to the purpose of our adversaries. That's why Kashmiris have suffered a lot, and it's our collective responsibility to prioritize our goal vis-a-vis Kashmir and develop a strategy to work towards the peaceful settlement of this issue. Last but not the least, let me also share strong reservations of the Kashmiris regarding the media, Pakistan's mainstream media, towards their cause, as they think that Pakistani media gives more time to India's film industry than their cause. They regret that while the majority in India's Godi media ceaselessly peddle the fake news fed by their government on Kashmir, the Pakistani media does not have space for their truth. With these words, I beg to leave. Thank you for giving me a patient hearing.
Thank you very much, Naqash. That was an excellent presentation, very comprehensive from the Kashmiri point of view and how the Kashmiris see this, and especially in detail how Tariq has explained to us what has followed the scrapping of Article 370. Borrowing this term from an article that was written by somebody at the Harvard magazine, it's really a colonial settler setup that the Indians have moved towards. So you really have a comprehensive structure of occupation by the Indians. You've heard in detail what Tariq has been saying. It seems that the Indian government has left no stone unturned to really take control of Jammu and Kashmir. I also want to make an announcement that two of our speakers, Sayyida Hamid had to come from India. She's a Kashmiri, born in Srinagar. She could not come, she didn't get the visa, but in addition to that, she felt like it was not safe for her to be talking in the seminar on Kashmir in Pakistan because, as Tariq Naqash has rightly pointed out, the media generally and specifically the Kashmiri media is under a lot of stress and control by the Indian government, to put it very mildly. Our second speaker, who should have been here, Raja Farooq Haider Saab, former PM of AJK. I was told by the organizers that he cancelled just last minute. They have asked me to talk about Pakistan's Kashmir policy. I will first ask Victoria to take the floor, and she'll speak on the issues that basically influence the global scene and Kashmir, because she's works on Kashmir, her ears and eyes on the ground as well. And after that, I'll few words on Pakistan's Kashmir policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and assalamu alaikum, everyone. It's wonderful to see some rows filled. And as Nasim said, I've been working on Kashmir for a number of years as a journalist and reporter. I've been fortunate to visit both sides of the line of control, and I think that you've heard very fully from Tariq Naqash his views, and I think it's very important because one of the problems of the Jammu Kashmir issue is that it is often taken over by what I would say, quotes, foreign speakers because Kashmiris can't speak. And the instance you have just referenced, Nasim, of fear of saying something has really dominated getting a true perspective of what's going on the ground. And I've certainly found this myself when I've been to the Valley of Kashmir, that I can speak to people off the record, but the minute I say, will you go on the record? They say, no, we'd sooner not because of reprisals. This is a very unequal situation. It doesn't give you the equilibrium of freedom of speech, of the values that we all like to try and uphold. What I do want to do, really to try and complement what Tariq has said, is just, in a way, to roll back the history. Obviously, I'm going to talk about the abrogation in a minute, but I think it's very important, especially as I see there are young students here, young lawyers, to understand what we are actually talking about, because this is one of the problems which I think has held back a resolution of the Jammu and Kashmir issue, is that we talk very freely about Kashmir, we talk very freely about self-determination, but we do have to go back to 1947 to understand what the Jammu and Kashmir dispute is and what the situation is on the ground for all the components of the state. Even if we tick off the box and say, well, the situation is not as bad in that region, it's not as bad in the other region, we do have to know what we're talking about, because especially if you want to involve the international community, they also have to understand what is being talked about. We don't have a map here, but let us remind ourselves of the former princely state of Jammu and Kashmir, which includes Gilgit-Baltistan, Azad Jammu and Kashmir, Ladakh, the Valley of Kashmir, and Jammu. Now, I always equate it to a large butterfly sprawling across the Himalayan mountains. But until we have a resolution of the dispute, we don't have settlement of any of these regions in terms of their future political allegiance or status. We talk again, and Tariq has mentioned this, the UN framework. That's what the UN framework is looking at, the resolution of what is the future of the entire state. And there is no mention of chipping and chiseling it down into its zonal preferences. It is the entire state. And this is what has tripped up resolution for so many decades, because you get stuck on the fact that, well, the Ladakhis are happier with their status as it is. The Gilgit-Baltis are happier with their status as it is. And so by definition, if you're looking at resolution, are we looking at a zonal resolution? Are we looking at what for many is a heretical resolution by splitting the state? And this has to be on the board for discussion, because otherwise we'll get nowhere. If we talk in non-substantive terms about the valley or just Kashmir, we've got to put it in context with the whole region, because as we know, what we are really talking about is the disaffection, is the suffering, is the human rights abuses which are going on in the Valley of Kashmir. That is the real region of contention, that's the region of misery, and that's the region that has been most affected by the abrogation of Article 370. Now, I happened to be in the Valley of Kashmir just before the article was abrogated. There was this mood in the air that the Modi government is going to put its money where its mouth is, so to speak, and it finally is going to go for abrogation. A lot of Kashmiris were very concerned, they were very jittery. Not so much for what it would mean in practical terms, because they didn't anticipate some of the fallout, but in emotional terms. Ever since 1947, they've always had this ability to feel they can take strength from the fact that they are protected by Article 370. Therefore, the abrogation in terms of morale was very demoralizing. More demoralizing was abrogating the state's status as a state and turning it into a union territory so that it is governed from New Delhi. The second fallout, of course, has been, as Tariq has mentioned, the demographic changes which have been put into effect. Because all the time, the valley, and we aren't talking about a very large region. Yes, it may have I think you said 6.8 million people, but in terms of length and breadth, it's roughly 90 miles long, 20 to 25 miles wide. That is the Valley of Kashmir, surrounded by the mountains. The larger regions are far less populated. But if you think of the flood of people coming into that beautiful valley who are non-Kashmiri, that is what has hurt the Kashmiris by the abrogation of Article 370. Politically, many of the rights had already been abrogated and handed over to the Indian government. But the emotional aspect, the removal of the flag, this did upset Kashmiris tremendously. And practically, the fact that the land, which is small, and that's why that Hereditary State Subject Act in 1927 was passed, so that people didn't just flood up and buy property, rich Indians from the plains. And Nehru himself, when he endorsed it, Article 335A, I haven't got the exact quotation in front of me, but he said, why should we allow our beautiful Kashmir to be more or less inhabited by carpetbaggers? He didn't quite use the word carpetbaggers, but that was the implication. And so we are in a very transitional phase for the Valley of Kashmir, because we don't know how we can ever go back. And I think that's what has been particularly challenging, and certainly in the 5-year period since the article was abrogated, there is this feeling, and I know certainly Pakistan, and you will be talking about this, Nasim, Pakistan's policy was, well, we're not going to have any talks with the Indian government until they put back Article 370. This, I think, we have moved away from. There is not much anticipation, not much hope, especially with elections taking place in India later this year, and indeed the return of the Modi government, that they will go back on what they've said. But within this, we do have to have some hope that the situation on the ground for the inhabitants of the Valley of Kashmir can be improved. And I think one of the most important moves forward in this regard is returning state status to the Valley of Kashmir and indeed to Jammu. The current situation which we have bears no relation to ground realities. If you think about the map which is issued and distributed to all embassies and to all countries, that map shows Jammu and Kashmir as a union territory, including Azad Jammu and Kashmir. Imagine if you're a student of Jammu and Kashmir in an Indian high school and you're handed this map and you're going to think, well, that's nice, I might trot off to Muzaffarabad. No indication of where the line of control is. Likewise, the union territory of Ladakh includes Gilgit-Baltistan. And also, by the way, totally neglects the fact that China is occupying the northeastern wing of Ladakh, Aksai Chin. So we're starting in very obscurantist understanding if you're looking at a map which is the official map of the government of India. I myself traveled, as I said, even before 2019, and even then the line of control was not indicated because constitutionally, as you know, from the instrument of accession, the government of India believes that the whole of the state of Jammu and Kashmir is part of India. So where next? We do need to look scientifically as to what bits of land are controlled by what countries and whether the aspirations of the people living in those regions are met. And the irony is that if you go back to 1950, and I do advise anyone who's interested in understanding the history because it's available online, the report of the Australian jurist Sir Owen Dixon made it very clear that the way forward was indeed a zonal plebiscite, because you can't have one grouping dictating the futures of another grouping where there is a dissension of a viewpoint. And I think it's a useful framework, and I would add that to your UN framework if you're talking about going back to UN framework and having a plebiscite at all, because it's very clear, and that's why one has to know and understand the complexities of the state. And again, look at the history. Parachute back to 1846. It was the British who, for strategic reasons, put together a state which actually didn't have any cultural or indeed religious or indeed linguistic affinity for their own strategic ambitions. They wanted to be able to count on the loyalty of the Maharaja of Jammu and Kashmir against the rising power of the Sikhs. And I've said this to a number of people, and they've said, what, the state of Jammu and Kashmir doesn't go back hundreds and hundreds of years? And I said, no, it was created in 1846 as a state. And so I think we must put all this into the equation when we're thinking about what next. Because what really is our objective? Our objective must surely be the human rights and dignity and freedoms for the people living in the Valley of Kashmir. Because it's their rights, their freedoms, which, as we know only too clearly, that are being restricted. The fact of the difficulty of getting a visa, the lack of freedom of speech, as Tariq mentioned, and as I've experienced, journalists who can't talk to you, so it's very difficult to get a true picture of what's going on because people are afraid. The rule of law, we are at a legal conference. The rule of law should be paramount. I have friends, including, you will know, Fahad Shah, who's Kashmirwala. He just wanted to be a journalist. He wanted to report on all aspects of what was going on. He's now been in jail for months, for over a year. This Khurram Parvez, human rights activist. There are so many more who are in jail. Then we've got a panel on enforced disappearances also later in the program. The disappearances in the Valley of Kashmir disappeared and with no trace. No accountability. Again, we can go on to the statistics of those who've already been killed, of the orphans, of the half-widows, women who can't remarry because their husbands have disappeared but haven't reappeared, and therefore they are half-widows. They don't know what's happened to them. These are the aspects that we want to look at and to try and resolve. And again, I repeat, through discussion, through negotiation, through somehow prizing open the conscience of the government of India, and if the world can help to prize open that conscience, so be it. But as I say, they need to understand what the issues are. And I think, I will conclude on the note that we must keep it in our public awareness, because you never know when those tectonic plates of diplomacy and public relations which exist between two countries can shift and be aligned. We've had moments, but they've been lost. But for the sake of humanity, we need to be present and correct when those tectonic plates realign. And if the international community can be helpful, so be it. We cannot meddle, but if we can be helpful as facilitators, I think that's important. You mentioned the instrument of accession being an international agreement, but as important is the Shimla, 1972 Shimla Agreement, which I think the narrative changed because the international community went to sleep on the issue, thinking, well, now they've agreed that Jammu Kashmir is a bilateral issue, then we don't have to worry about it. But read that, again, easily available online. It makes no mention of Jammu and Kashmir in that clause 2. It says we agree to outstanding issues bilaterally or by any other means mutually agreed upon. So the way for international facilitation is open. And Jammu and Kashmir is mentioned in another clause at the bottom, that the ceasefire line will be renamed the line of control. But it's a narrative that has got into our rhetoric and hasn't been challenged. So I do think it's important to, and I would say this, wouldn't I, as a historian, to know one's history, because only by knowing the history can one be useful as an interlocutor. If you don't know your history, rings can be run around you by others who think they know more or maybe know more. So I encourage and exhort all students to understand what the Jammu Kashmir issue is. It's very complex, but it bears understanding. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Schofield. Thank you. Let's just, having looked at this situation from the point of view of Kashmiris, Kashmir, and then looking at the global situation that Victoria has referred to, and in fact has urged that the global, players should engage with it. Let me, looking at both these different aspects, just come to the elephant in the room, so to say. Pakistan's policy obviously is very critical on Kashmir, and I mean, there's a whole long history there, 47 onwards. But let me just start with 2019 onwards. 2019, once we had the the article scrapped, 370, Pakistan took a very aggressive position on this, diplomatically an aggressive position on this. Please, may I request you to switch off the ringers, please, when you're sitting in the seminar? Thank you so much. Pakistan took a very aggressive diplomatic position, and led by the then Prime Minister Imran Khan himself. And it's not something that he himself just worked on. There was a national security division, and individuals there really worked in at length on the communication policy at that point, and that really was the important factor at that point. How was Pakistan going to position itself globally through the media, diplomatically, etc.? And I remember General Bajwa then saying to me at one point that that Pakistan government went went on and on talking about equating Modi with Hitler, and talking about Holocaust, etc., and all of that. And he said that it got so bad that I was asked by the British High Commissioner, the then British High Commissioner, who said to me that the Indians are saying there's a message from Modi to tell Imran Khan not to be referring to Hitler, etc., and that it's getting too difficult, etc. And that was the time, if you all recall, and if you were interested in it, to research that the Western media was actually had taken it up. Victoria, isn't that true? That the Western media had really taken it up very aggressively as well. You know,
Sorry.
yeah. So
Sorry, I was going to make a comment on that, because I'm glad you're mentioning that, because India complained about the internationalization of the issue, but that was the one time when the issue was really international.
really internationalized, yeah. And so then General Bajwa said, I told Imran to just take it easy or whatever. But I think we took a very, very correct position then, and as we should have. And then towards the end of 21, I think this carried on for about a year and a half, 2 years. Towards the end of 2020, Pakistan then very strangely, one fine morning we heard that Pakistan has agreed on the LOC, ceasefire along the LOC, with the Indians. And when we tried to investigate and find out what was behind it, we were told that no, it just means that things will be better for the Kashmiris on the other side. There'll be no firing. There won't be an exchange of firing, so the Kashmiris will be protected. And we all felt at that point that that just didn't make sense. And then back channel negotiations of sorts began. And I remember in meetings, in larger groups and smaller groups, with raising the issue with General Bajwa. And there were many witnesses, including Ahmed Mir, to these conversations. And it just didn't make sense. But I think the military top command at that point, led by General Bajwa, was most confused and most naive, very naive about the Pakistan, India, and the Kashmir issue. And he completely misread. And in fact, we were told, for till a long time, we were being told that the Indians have conveyed to us that the Supreme Court will restore statehood, and that just those who follow the Indian policy, who's been following, that this is not possible. And so, having said that, the point is, what the big challenge for Pakistan, the really big challenge for Pakistan, is to see how do you move ahead with in a situation where, number one, India's track record is what it is. Modi's done what he's done. He will be re-elected. And number four, if you look at the geostrategic global picture, India is increasingly being seen as a key partner, no less than the way UK and US etc. are seeing Israel as a partner. I mean, I think the Western powers governments don't have a leg to stand on talking about human rights. It's a shame what is happening to the Palestinians, uh, and with complete support of the Western powers. There are weapons being sent even now as we speak to the Israelis who are committing genocide. So I think that banking in any way on Western governments and Western powers would be naive. But I think what Victoria is saying is very critical, because in her country, the number of people who have come out in support of the Palestinians, I think all the Muslim countries put together, you don't have those numbers out. So you are really looking at a situation where the governments are on a different, trajectory of supporting genocide, and the people are coming out in unprecedented ways. So Victoria's point of really being very clearly messaging to the world, and then we have people like Victoria, I think, who's no less than a Kashmiri herself, in terms of what she understands, what she conveys, how she is able to really spread the word. I mean, obviously, people like Tariq are critical, but people like Victoria are also important. And as far as Pakistan is concerned, let me just end this point about Pakistan's policy on Kashmir by saying that Pakistan is highly confused, is very confused. It doesn't seem to me that you can pick up one element of a policy with India and move ahead. If you're talking of trade with India, trade with India has to be part of a broader understanding of what you want to do with India, because India's policy there are issues of water, there is the issue of Kashmir, there's the issue of trade, and so on and so forth. So I think that we are failing repeatedly to come up with a comprehensive policy on India and hence on Kashmir. So I think that period when after scrapping of Article 370, the way Pakistan actually moved ahead was the right approach. And I don't see us doing that right now in any systematic way. It is true that every time there's a UN meeting, GA, every prime minister, you can't say that Nawaz Sharif said more and Imran said less, or Imran said less and Bilawal Bhutto said more. All of them go and say what is to be said. But the question is, actively, what are we doing? There is a whole systematic approach that needs to be followed and adopted, because the Indians have no qualms about seeing people like Yasin Malik and Khurram Parvez to death. They have put them behind bars. And I mean, Khurram Parvez, 2 weeks before he was, he was kidnapped and imprisoned, and we don't know what condition he is in. He is one of the most articulate, most ethical, most well-known human rights activist. And in fact, he came up with this, really major study called Structures of Violence, in which he, I think, picked up 90 cases of Kashmiris. And he demonstrated through those cases that the Kashmiri Supreme Court, the Kashmiri law enforcement, the Indian Supreme Court, the Indian courts, the Indian law enforcement agency, all of them have been systematically involved in making sure that the Kashmiris are denied their rights. So I think that the Kashmiris are up against a difficult situation. And as far as Pakistan is concerned, let me say that it's not only about Kashmiris. Kashmiris is critical. I think General Musharraf, with all his negativities, I mean, he was obviously a military ruler, so he was a military ruler, and you can't, but condemn that aspect. But he was the first one who was categorical in saying that the Kashmiris come first when you're talking of the Kashmir issue, and that the option of an independent Kashmir. Benazir Bhutto said that. Then Benazir Bhutto, in fact, said it before General Musharraf. So what I'm saying is that Pakistan's position, articulated position, is fine. But what are we to do in terms of, practically what can we do? Pakistan's relationship with India obviously is, there's one school of thought in Pakistan, people who believe become friends with India and give up Kashmir and, recognize Israel, and all your problems will be solved. I think that's such an inertia-led, lazy approach, which, we shut our eyes to the reality of the mess we have within Pakistan in terms of governance, in terms of throwing the constitution away, in terms of, the influence and interference of the military, in terms of, what's happening in the political sphere. So and economy, etc. So I think on India, it's a comprehensive policy that we have to look at, and within that, what we are doing on Kashmir is, highly confused and certainly not adequate. So just let me end on this, and then let's open up the floor for questions. Thank you. Just name the person you want the answer from. Thank you.
So, Nasim, can I just make the point about Khurram Parvez's report? In that report, detailing all the abuses, he actually used Indian government source material. It was all there. He just collated it, and I think that speaks volumes also.
You have summed it up. The policy, the government of Pakistan is confused. India is consistent in its policies. It has, you all know that Modi had plans to abolish this special status of Jammu and Kashmir long before coming to power, and in his first stint, 2014, he had announced it in its election manifesto. And when he came to power, when he got enough strength, he implemented his plan. On the other hand, we 76 years down the line, we are still unsure that what should be our policy. One day we come up with the one idea, and the other day we have another idea. This should end. I mean, that's why I say you summed it up. Pakistan should end up this confusion and reach a policy with complete consensus, taking the Kashmiris on board and making up its mind if it has to give up something to the Kashmiris for the sake of deliverance of Kashmiris, it should do that. I mean, rise above your interests and think about the Kashmiris who have been shedding blood for the past so many years. Thank you.
Please raise your hands, introduce yourselves, and just address the person you want to ask. Ji. Pakistan, in case you think I'm the government, I'm not the government. मेरा ख्याल है कि आपका जी आपका सवाल तो बिल्कुल वैलिड सवाल है, लेकिन मैं इतना आपको कहूँगी कि आप ये बताएं कि पाकिस्तान की अपनी कितनी गवर्नेंस को पूरी पूरी इंडिपेंडेंस मिलती है, तो पाकिस्तान में बड़ा एक डीप मसला है, और गाहे बगाहे बात होती है कि कश्मीरियों को उनका राइट मिलना चाहिए, गिलगित बल्तिस्तान को उनका राइट मिलना चाहिए. पाकिस्तान में एक इनसिक्योरिटी डायलेमा है vis-a-vis the provinces, vis-a-vis KPK, vis-a-vis even the Kashmiris. So this has to be work in process. I think that आहिस्ता आहिस्ता ये करना पड़ेगा आपको. आहिस्ता आहिस्ता क्या, look at the condition right now. I think things will have to be settled. When there were political governments, उस वक्त बातचीत तो हुई थी. आप relatively हालात बेहतर हुए या throughout ऐसे रहे? जी. जी बताइए.
I'll say something on that. Yeah. Are you talking? You're talking about leaving the people of Kashmir to govern themselves. Are you talking about the inhabitants of the former state, or just the Valley of Kashmir and Azad, Jammu and Kashmir put together? Because if you, I mean, I'll talk you through both scenarios. If you're talking about the entire state being independent, as it once was, it was for how many days? You know, from August 15th to October 26th. No, yes, I mean, I'm talking about after the post-independence period, and then, of course, for 101 years. That would require not only India, but also Pakistan giving up territory. And that would require them, if you look at Pakistan's policy, it would require giving up Gilgit-Baltistan and as a Jammu and Kashmir. Gilgit-Baltistan strategically extremely important for Pakistan's survival, and likewise as a Jammu and Kashmir, because that's where you have the water and the Mangla Dam. It would require India giving up not only the Valley of Kashmir, but Ladakh, which is strategically important because of its relationship with China, and the Jammu region. And this is why in my presentation I was wanting to emphasize that we have to know what we're talking about. And it would mean both, I mean, I've met Kashmiris who say, well, we have to fight both the Indian government and the Pakistani government to get our own state back. But you've also got to look at what's practical on the ground realities. They have no army, they have no weapons, they have, you know, it's really impossible. And for Pakistan's rhetoric, when they're on the one hand saying they support the Kashmiris' right of self-determination, but they're not prepared to let go of the part of the state that they control, you're in a very difficult position. If you reduce it down and say, no, we don't want Ladakh and we don't want Gilgit-Baltistan, we just want to put back the Valley of Kashmir, Jammu, and AJK, you're facing a similar problem because you've got to get both states to agree to relinquish territory, which they consider vital. That's the difficulty.
जी एक सेकंड मतलब देखें ये जो आप कह रही हैं, you know what you're saying, I can understand the sentiment, but naturally, you know, to get from where we are today to just Kashmiri citizens on both sides just doing what they want to do, there's a whole process now. There are steps. On one side, you have an Indian occupation army there, the most occupied, area in the world. And on this side, you have compulsions of the government plus the absence of any settlement. So I guess ultimately, the reality is that something like the 4-point formula, I know it's a very unpopular formula, but it has to be a process approach where you have to look at both the countries and the Kashmiris will have to sit down and talk. And the UN Security Council resolution remains critical because that's the mainstay of even the discussion that we are having today. So that ought to be there. But finally, two countries plus the Kashmiris will have to sit down. तो process है ना, जो आप कह रही हैं वो अपनी जगह ठीक कह रही हैं, लेकिन practically तो you need to follow a process.
विक्टोरिया जो कह रही थी, मैं इनको बताना चाह रहा हूँ, पाकिस्तान नहीं छोड़ेगा जो रकबा पाकिस्तान के पास है, जो उसके ज़ेर इंतज़ाम है, चूँकि वो इसके लिए बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है। ऑब्वियसली गिलगित बल्तिस्तान को नहीं छोड़ सकता बिकॉज वो चाइना से वाहिद रास्ता है। आज़ाद कश्मीर में इस वक्त पाकिस्तान की बहुत सी एनर्जी नीड्स पूरी हो रही हैं। देयर इज़ नीलम जेलम 969 मेगावाट, देयर इज़ मंगला मोर देन 1000 मेगावाट्स इरिगेशन नीड्स पूरी हो रही हैं। इसी तरह इंडिया भी अपने इलाके बिल्कुल नहीं छोड़ेगा। द प्रॉब्लम इज़ विद कश्मीर वैली, जहाँ इस वक्त एंटी इंडिया मूवमेंट भी है। any solution has to be on the basis of give and take, and both sides, what is needed is both sides agree to it and sit together and end this problem for good, for the good betterment of their own people on both sides. Thank you.
जी.
My name is Sultan, and I did my from the University of Cambridge, and I studied history movies like Kashmir, studied research as well in Kashmir, and I also come from. And I think my mentor is Schofield, so I think he's there. So, and I've known from Kashmir as well. I'm from Egypt, yeah, and I've known from physical family from Kashmir. So I think in terms of adoption, because I'm researching on it, I think it's very important we understand the history of adoption, because I found 90% of people don't know. Okay, Azad Kashmir was a state which was meant to be a pro-Pakistan state, because if you see the people who are we call it founding fathers of Azad Kashmir, that I already mentioned, all those people, they came from the Indian side of Kashmir to Pakistan and said we are pro-Pakistani. Instrument of accession was signed in July 1947, even before India and Pakistan went on to war. So I think Azad Kashmir government was formed on 24 October, even before India and Pakistan went to war on 26th of October. So 2 days before the India-Pakistan agreement. So they, Azad Kashmir, this strip of land we have, it was liberated by mostly the local people and not, we can, there's an argument in the history books that KPK people helped them, but it was largely initiated with that. Because one of the, like, my grandfather was one of the freedom fighters in that movement, that's how I know as well. So it's a very pro-Pakistan government. And at one point we say Pakistan is doing to Azad Kashmir this, but if Azad Kashmir leaders, India is against them. If they want to go against Pakistan, then where do they actually go to? We have to understand the dilemma of them. Because at the end, we want to improve the condition of Kashmiris and not to fight Pakistan and India. So I think that's we have to keep balance in mind when we have to decide with the government too much, because we have to be practical. You can't just say, oh, we just need to fight, with the Pakistan Prime Minister. You just have to be practical.
Thank you. I guess Pakistan's policy has to be, in terms of confusion and what it should be, I think that we have to have clarity in our position with India, and then having decided that we will stand with the Kashmiris, we have a commitment to the Kashmiri people for their right of self-determination. We should, on the political front, be political and diplomatic front, not shy away from talking comprehensively. I would go back to what Victoria was saying, talk about what's happening on the ground, because the fact is that the Kashmiris, there's a lid on the Kashmiri, dialogue. There is complete oppression and suppression of multiple kinds what the Kashmiris are facing in IOK. And Pakistan and the Kashmiris on this side have to play a role in terms of articulating categorically and clearly where the Indian government is committing excesses. And I think we shy away from that. We, as I said, there was a national security division when Dr. Moeed Yusuf, etc., were there. They did work very hard and they put together a policy. So one day you saw at the airport, Islamabad airport, this huge banner or huge poster saying Modi is a fascist, and the fourth day, you were talking about having trade with India. So I think there's that confusion. But let me just say this to you that unfortunately, because of the kind of power play and politics we've had in this country, on a lot of issues, there is this confusion. So that's one. And your second question was, sorry? Yeah, well, I think that it's completely fine for people to have different views. There is a view in this country. If you pick up the media, if you go to seminars, some people feel, some people feel that Pakistan has a very, it takes up a very hard line on Israel. Why? The Israelis don't help us. Where do the Palestinians help us when it's a matter of, engaging with India and, dealing with the Kashmir issue? So why are we doing this? Don't you hear this? There's a lot of, I hear that quite often. And at the same, now to up to nahi karte because of what the Israelis are doing right now. But on India, there's a continuous debate that goes on. That too much of a hard line, open the border with India, things will be okay, it'll be hunky dory. I think that I have a different view, but I respect the view that people have. I don't think that that's the approach to take. Dialogue is critical. Dialogue must be the starting point, but this policy since 2019, August 5th, 2019, I think we just climbed ourselves into a corner by saying no talk until you do reverse. Who's going to reverse? So that's why I think the military command of that time decided to, very naively, decided to say, okay, so there's going to be ceasefire and we'll start back channel dialogue. And who was doing the back channel dialogue then? There was the ISI chief from Pakistan side. I don't think military people understand diplomacy. Diplomacy is a complicated thing. The military top command has a role to play, in the realm of security. I mean, that's completely fine. But the kind of dialogue that, look at, who was the person, the counterpart, the Indian counterpart? It was Ajit Doval, who had been sitting in Gamesha, jante na aap? He sat in Gamesha for 3 years as an undercover agent. And he sat in Data Darbar for 2 years as an undercover agent. And he knew the ins and outs of how Pakistan was thinking, etc., etc. And compared to, opposite him was sitting General Faiz Hamid in negotiations, and I raised that with General Bajwa, what kind of an interlocutor? And he said, well, he was just a post box or whatever, he was not actually negotiating. So what I'm saying is that we have issues within, and we really need to sort those issues out. And also, it seems to me that we shy away generally. Now, this is not pointing fingers at any institution, but ourselves also, us as intellectuals. I think that's a whole other story. I don't want to take up too much time, but I think we are too angry, we are too derivative, we just pick up things in short kind of spaces and fragmented approaches, and hence we end up being confused whether inside the government or outside. Thank you. Thank you. Absolutely. Economically strong Pakistan is a strong Pakistan, period, and has leverage. So we need to improve our workings on CPEC. We really need to get into CPEC in a mature, competent space, CPEC 2, and not drag our feet on that. We need to not be talking about SIFC repeatedly, but in fact, as the Saudis express interest in various projects in Pakistan, we need to be in our country, we need to be at the cutting edge in terms of supply chains, chain block, investment, in terms of portfolios that we develop. We need to really get out of this space where for decades we've whether it's the business community or whether it is the state or whether it's been the elite in this country, and just not be living off low level functionality, whether it's in the area of business, etc., or whether it's in the area of business, finance, trade, etc. So we need to, what you're saying is 100% true, but the answer is not just, the solution won't come from importing tomatoes and wheat from India only. It will come from really looking at ourselves, and there's a whole world out there for trade. We must trade with India, but that should be part of a broader dialogue and settlement. Thank you. Okay, so let me just thank the two panelists and thank you all for participating in this. We'll conclude this right now. Khuda Hafiz.